Hello everybody. Looks like the gauge says it's empty. Let's take a walk into the kitchen and see what's in the fridge today, guys. Alright guys, it's Greg. We're here at Dogfish Head, giving away 4 free samplings, and they're running out of beer quick. We've been here about 20 minutes and they've already run out of about 2 or 3 different beers. So this is what they have. I don't know if you can read it from there. And the ones that are wiped out, they've run out already. So it's pretty crowded in here. Not too bad on that side, but they're wall to wall here, and about half of them just left for the tour. That's what we're waiting on. We're going to take the tour. So here's what they have on tap, supposedly. We're going to take the tour. Let's see what's in the fridge. Doing the tour at Dogfish Head.
Before we leave this area, I'm going to point out a couple of these items we have to split here, because I will be referring back to them in the tour. Once we come back, if you want to take a closer look at them, if you have questions about them, any of us that work here in the tour room would be happy to assist. The first of these items is this 10-gallon home brew system. This is the original brewing system that we use at our Rehoboth Brew Club, Dogfish Head Brewing and Eats on Rehoboth Avenue in 1995. The first beer that we made was Shelter Pale Ale. Over here on this side, we've got our original bottling line. Took 3 guys to operate, 1 to wash and dry the bottles, 1 to fill, and 1 to cap. We actually used a corker. This didn't work very well. It's hard to get the corks out. Often the bottles would break, so we didn't do that for very long. Finally, we have Sir Hopsalot here. He was our original continual hopping mechanism, our official original continual hopping mechanism. He's since been retired. We've got a new one. You're going to get to see that one on the tour. Also, we've got lots of beer ingredients down here displayed. I would encourage you when you come back, if you're interested, to take those out, open them up, and take a sniff. I don't recommend eating them. I have to say that because we're going to disappoint you in the past. Also, we've got some of our spirits down here. We have a distillery at Rehoboth Brew Club in the upstairs. We have vodka and rum and gin. So you can take a look at those bottles. Unfortunately, we don't sell them here, but you can buy them at Rehoboth. A couple of safety items I'm going to discuss with you before we get started. Safety glasses. You've got to have safety glasses. There are a couple boxes of those. Rubber by the door. We're going to take the glass in just a moment. Please grab some of those. Also, open toe shoes. Just come out of toes today. I'm going to ask you to comment there about how they fashion Crocs while we're in the back. Also, if you have gotten beer while you're waiting, now's the time to drink. You're going to want to go ahead and finish that up and dispose of your cup. Ironically, beer is not allowed in the brewery. Not my idea. I would have a beer if I could. So you're going to want to go ahead and dispose of that.
Getting ready for phase 2. Alright guys, we're getting ready to start the tour at Dogfish Head. Coming through the door here. They're doing a lot of work here. They're doing a lot of expansion. Go ahead.
I am! It's all off my feet!
They make you wear safety glasses and change your shoes if you have open-toed shoes. Look how much too big they are for her. That would be more of a safety hazard than wearing your own shoes. That's screwed up, guys. Oh, it's hot in here.
So the term craft beer is something that often we don't know what we mean by the term craft beer. There are 3 rules to being considered a craft brewery as laid down by the Brewers Association, which is our governing body. The first of those has to do with the traditional ingredients. Can anyone tell me what the 4 traditional ingredients are? Water, malt,
Barley, yeast.
hops, and yeast, yes. So the one we're concerned with in these terms is the barley being used as a malt. The Brewers Association says that either your flagship beer, the beer that you sell the most of, has to be a 100% barley beer, or that 50% of your production in beers have to be all barley. And if you use any other grains, that they must be only to enhance the recipe. For example, some of the larger industrial brewers will to lighten or cheapen the beer, which produces a cheaper beer for you to buy. Also, is a much less full flavored beer. So, to use barley, we also will use things like wheat and rye. In some cases, even rice and corn. For example, our Chateau Jiahu is one of our ancient ale series. It's based on a 9,000-year-old Chinese recipe where we have used rice and also a strain of yeast similar to sake. So we will use ground rice syrup in that recipe to make it more authentic. The second rule of craft beer has to do with volume. You may not produce more than 6 million barrels of beer per year. A barrel is 31 gallons. That's the standard by which beer is taxed. Can anyone tell me what the largest craft brewery in America?
Sam Adams.
Sam Adams. Last year they produced about 2 million barrels. Dogfish is number 13. Last year we produced about 173,000 barrels of beer. This year we're on target for about 200,000, and with our new expansion we're looking at about 500,000 by the year 2020. Our final rule for craft beer is independent ownership. Not more than 25% of the business may be owned by someone who is not a member of the craft beer industry. So for example, if you have a craft brewery and you go out and sell 50% of your company to someone like Anheuser-Busch, you are no longer considered a craft brewery. Now, of course, it's happening. Although the craft beer industry only takes up about 6.5% of the U.S. market in volume, a little over 10% in dollars, we grew about 15% last year. This is the craft beer industry as a whole, not just Dogfish. The beer market in general is pretty stagnant. So craft beer is the market. So as that happens, some of those larger breweries are buying up some craft beer labels, so that they own more than 25%. Those are no longer technically considered craft beer. We are, of course, 100% family owned. Does anyone know the name of our owner and family?
Sam.
Sam. Yes. He and his family own all of the Dogfish Head. Let's just talk a little bit about how Sam got started in brewing. He graduated from college in 1992 with an English degree. Went on to Columbia University to do some postgraduate work. Went to work at a restaurant in Manhattan named Nacho Mama's Burritos. The owner of that restaurant was an early adopter of craft beer. Back in the early 90s, craft beer was not nearly as popular as it is today. And those beers didn't do very prominently on his menu. Sam got his first taste of Sierra Nevada Celebration Ale. Appreciated how it had much fuller flavor than some of the cheap beers that he'd been drinking in college. The owner was also an avid home brewer, so Sam took an interest in that as well. Ultimately decided that he did not want to make fish people or writer, but that he wanted to make beer. So he needed to break the news to his parents, who had just finished paying for his very expensive English degree, that he had no intention of using it, and he started opening his own brewery. So in this situation, you want to help someone to relax, maybe on vacation, hopefully drinking a beer. So you want to see them at the family vacation home. Anyone have any idea where that's located? Well, it seems like a really logical answer, and it's more ridiculous, but it is incorrect. There's a little bit of land right outside of Eastgate Harbor, Maine, and the name of it is Dogfish. So right up to Dogfish, talk to his parents. They were a little reluctant at first, but also didn't want to be supportive. So his dad said to him, I think that Dogfish would be an excellent name for a brewery. Sam really has been in no position to argue the point, particularly as a 20-something entrepreneur. Most likely the next conversation that we're going to have is in regards to potential investment. This worked well for him nonetheless. Sam wanted something that was a distinctive name, something that would not be easily confused with another brewery. I think Dogfish Head fits the bill. Also lends to a very distinctive logo. And also it is not usually significant. So even though Dogfish Head is a real place, many people have not heard of it. It has sort of a general rustic, really sound to it. He didn't want something, he knew all along that he was going to want to distribute nationally at some point, so he didn't want something like a Delaware Brewing Company. Sam's originally from Western Massachusetts. We talked about Manhattan, we talked about Maine. How did we end up in Delaware? White, yes. One of the oldest stories in the book. Sam's high school sweetheart, Mariah. They met at boarding school in She is a homegrown Southern Delaware girl, just like me. And so when they decided to get married, she said, I'm going to get married in Southern Delaware, have a family. I want to live close to my family in Southern Delaware. Once again, Sam did not argue this point. It worked out well for him again. He had the idea in his mind that he wanted to open a brewery in a state that did not already have one. Delaware still had laws on the books from prohibition stating that she did not have a brewery. Sam did not see this as an obstacle. He took his abundant charm and charisma up to the legislative hall and built it, knocked on a few doors, got the auction. Therefore, we became the first brewery in the first state. Sam and Mariah opened Dogfish Brewery in East, down Overhead Avenue in 1995. They always knew they wanted to open a restaurant. Back in those days, it's still craft beer to get a lot of respect. They thought about how they might change that. They looked at how wines were often paired with foods and thought that they could do the same thing. So if they had a restaurant, they could create dishes that would pair very nicely with beers and also create beers that were very culinary centered. Also, the restaurant would create an immediate source of cash flow to help support the new brewery. As I showed you downstairs, he started out on that 10-gallon system because that was all the money that he had left to invest in a brewery. It was at that time the smallest commercial brewery in the United States, probably the only one to ever be delivered to a UPS truck. He started out brewing that shelter pale ale twice a day, 5 days a week, just to keep up with the demand that he grew up. Sam's a pretty creative, restless kind of guy. He got bored of that pretty quickly, wandered into the kitchen at the restaurant, started picking up ingredients, and coming up with ideas for new beers. Now, at this point, that small system would have been an asset, because as he was coming up with what would have certainly been considered beers back in those days, he didn't have a huge commitment. He was only making 10 gallons. So if it didn't go over very well on tap at brew pub, he didn't have a lot invested in it. If he had been doing it on a larger system from the very beginning, he probably would have been much more restrained. We may not have the very inventive larger scale brewery that we have today. So we started out in 1995 with that 10-gallon system. By 1996, we moved up to a 5-barrel system. In 1997, we moved also to Lewis, Delaware, with a 30-barrel system. And then in 2002, we moved to the current location in Milton, Delaware, with a 50-barrel system. By 2007, we sold that system to Rush River Brewery in California and acquired the 100-barrel system that we're still using today, which is behind me. On the other side of that door, we have a new 200-barrel system, which is currently being installed, and that's the Germans barreling in the door on occasion. And we expect to be making beer in there probably in the next month. So if we come back, we'll get a chance to see that new brew house. We are ultimately going to run both systems concurrently. We've been brewing 24 hours a day, 7 days a week at capacity for some time. So once it's up and running, this one's going to get a little bit of well-needed love. And then eventually the new larger system will be devoted to our larger batch beers like a 60-minute IPA. The smaller one will be devoted to smaller, more seasonal brews. So our first ingredient malt, primarily barley, is going to come in from the ingredient room that you saw with the first wooden building as you were coming in the driveway. It's going to be deposited in its first chemical tank directly behind me. This is a wet grist mill. A small amount of hot water is going to be added and the grain is going to be cracked very slightly. Exposes the more surface area of the grain and the hot water will activate an enzyme that will begin the conversion of the starch in the grain into sugar. This is going to take about a half an hour. The mixture is then going to be transferred to the mash tun, which is through the tank directly behind. More hot water will be added until an oatmeal-like consistency is reached, and then that starch to sugar conversion will continue about 45 minutes depending on the beer. The entire mixture will be transferred over to the water tun, next tank in a row. It has a sip-like bottle, and the sugary fermentable liquid called wort that we're now creating is going to start to filter through the bottle. It's then going to be transferred over to the boil tank. Meanwhile, we've got all the grain that we started with in the water tun. We call this spent grain. We can no longer make beer from it, but it does have a purpose. And you'll tell me what that is? Well, we have contracts with local farms. Very often you'll see a dump truck on the other side of this wall with all loaded that kind of thing, and it gets taken out to the farms and is fed to cows. Although we can't use it, it's apparently still very tasty and nutritious. The cows seem to like it. They eat it, they get happy, they get fat, and then later on down the road we have contracts to buy that meat back from those farms, and we serve them to people in our neighborhood we love as delicious steaks and burgers. So if you want to complete that circle of life, you can go down there, order your favorite beer, and then enjoy a delicious indulgence burger, which was made from an animal that ate the grain that made the beer. We're going to talk a little bit more about food, but before we do, we're going to move down to the end of this platform. Don't go down the stairs, just so you can see these things that we'll talk about a little bit better. We usually have a small brewery. We have on tap there, sometimes more than that. So those are the people only go there. Unless, sometimes when they're really popular, they will actually go on to the very However, you do have a limit on how much hops you can add without over-bittering the beer. Sam had an idea about this. He was watching a cooking show one day when he saw a chef seasoning his soup throughout the entire cooking process because he said it would add a more consistent seasoning flavor. So he was at his local Salvation Army picking up some flannel shirts when he found one of those 1960s era football games where the field just vibrates around, the guys vibrate around on top. So he picked that up, brought it back to the brew house, got a 5-gallon bucket, drilled some holes in it, filled it full of hot pellets. Then he put that on top of the game and rigged the whole contraption up over the boil kettle. He positioned it so that as it vibrated, one hot pellet would come out and drop into the boil about every second. This went on for 90 minutes. 90-minute IPA was born. They put it on tap at the brew pub. Everyone loved it. Continual hopping was created. Sam came up with this concept. He did patent it. So we are the only brewery doing continual hopping. I pointed out Sir Hops a lot. Once that electronic game had hung out over that boiling kettle for 90 minutes, it pretty much gave up the ghost and never worked again. So that's where Sir Hops a lot came in. As I said, we have now retired that one. We have a new one. So over there, it's the conical tank between the two, the boil kettle and the whirlpool. And the name of that one is the Sofa King Hopping Machine. That doesn't make sense to you. Say it again in your head a little faster. You'll get it eventually. Plus, I'm going to add some base ingredients in the boil kettle, things like organic brown sugar for Indian brown ale or pumpkin ale, molasses for 75-minute IPA. Once that process has completed, we're going to transfer over to the whirlpool, which is the last tank in the line. Here the whirlpool is going to be spinning, the temperature is going to drop down to just below boiling. Here we're going to add some of our specialty ingredients, things like spices and fruits, which will steep like a tea, add flavor to the wort. Those will perhaps be too fragile to go into the boil kettle, so we're going to put them in now. This entire process from the beginning up to this point is going to take about 6 hours or so, again depending on the beer. The whirlpool is going to start to pull out some of those large particles we've added in. They will sink to the bottom where they'll be removed. We now must cool down our wort before we move on to fermentation. So it's going to be passed through a heat exchanger using cold groundwater. The wort's going to cool down, the groundwater is going to heat up, and then we're going to store it in a separate tank where we will use it for the next batch of beer. So the water's already warm, we don't have to use energy to heat it up. We're going to go on into fermentation now where it's going to be a lot cooler, I promise. So we'll go down the stairs and around the corner, and again, please watch your step.
I want what's in them barrels.
right here because it looks like that's as far as we can go. I am just going to ask that you leave a path on this side because we do have working brewers and contractors that may need to get through while we're here on the tour. We are going to get a chance to talk about the wood aging vessels in just a moment. You can come on in, just as I said, just if we could leave a path right here. No, stay over on this side, just leave a path right here in case we have workers that need to get through while we're doing the tour. So we've got 68-degree wort that is coming in from the other room through the pipes you see on the wall. It's going to make a stop off over here in our yeast room. We do propagate and maintain all of our own yeast strains. We have about a dozen. The wort is then going to be deposited into a fermentation tank. Over here on this side, we've got 26. They are 200 and 300 barrel tanks. As you came in outside, you may have seen some of those large tanks sticking up through the roof. Those are 600 barrel fermentation tanks, and we have 22 of those. Fermentation is going to take anywhere from a week to a month, depending on the beer. The higher alcohol the beer, the longer it's going to take. The yeast is now eating the sugar that we created in the brew house, and there are 3 byproducts of that. Can anyone tell me what they are?
Carbon dioxide.
Carbon dioxide. There's a really important one. It's why we're all here. Alcohol.
Beer.
Alcohol is what makes beer. The third one is heat. Heat's not good for beer. Causes off flavors over an extended period of time. So these tanks have a very special feature. They have a double wall with an outer layer of glycol that will keep those tanks at a constant 68 degrees. Also, although carbonation is good, too much in those tanks will create a dangerous level of pressure, so we have to bleed off some of that carbon dioxide while they're in those tanks. For some of our hoppier beers, we've got one more hopping machine, which unfortunately is not here today, where we'll add dry hops at the very end, and its name is Ooh, Me So Hoppy. So we're going to hook that up via hose to one of these hop dosing stations that you see labeled on the tanks. It's going to shoot dry hops in where it will dissolve, and you'll get your most fresh hops aroma and flavor.
Is that a version of a randalizer?
Yeah, well, kind of. I mean, it's not. We're not passing the beer through the hops. We're actually shooting the hops
into the beer.
And the guy everybody, a lot of tour guides say it looks like R2-D2. I think it looks like a big shop vac. And if I see it somewhere, I will point it out, but it's not here today. So some of those are going to get hopped. At this point, we're probably done with fermentation. We're going to crash the tank, bring it down to 31 degrees, which will cause the yeast to go dormant, stop eating sugar. They're going to drop to the bottom of these conical tanks where we can reharvest them. And in many cases, we can reuse that yeast 6 to 8 more times. At this point, there are 4 different things that can happen to the beer. We do have beer now because we've created alcohol. So there are 4 things that can happen as these come out of fermentation tanks. In most cases, we're going to go to a centrifuge where it's going to be spun very quickly, pulling out large particles like the hops we just added or anything that didn't come out in the whirlpool. Some of these beers are now complete. They're going to be ready to go into a bright tank where they will be recarbonated to the appropriate level because we had to bleed off some of the natural carbonation, and then they're ready to go to packaging. Some of our other beers will go through an additional filtering process. Here behind me, we have a diatomaceous earth filter, which is filled with a powder made from a fossilized marine animal. The beer is going to pass through that fine powder, and any of the small particulates left will be pulled out for a very clarified beer, like a 60-minute IPA, for example.
What is a fossilized brewing animal? Somebody like me?
If you were ground down into a powder. Do you swim?
Yes.
Then you, yeah, okay. Then you might qualify. I'm not authorized to make that judgment, but if the shoe fits, I guess. So we've got three beers that we bottle condition. So they're going to come out of fermentation, go into a specialized tank where they'll get another dose of yeast before they're packaged in 750 milliliter bottles. This would be Namaste, My Antonia, and 75-minute IPA. Once they're bottled, they're going to be stored in a temperature-controlled room for about 30 days. The yeast is going to start eating more sugar inside the bottle, creating a natural form of carbonation that has a much finer, more champagne-like bubble. Once we reach the end of that period, they're going to be tested to make sure they are in fact carbonated properly, and then they'll be ready to be shipped out. The one exception to the centrifuge first rule are our wood-aged beers. We have 5 of them. They're going to come directly out of fermentation tanks and go into our wood-aging vessels. They're going to stay there 4 to 6 weeks, and then they're going to go to the centrifuge before going on to the bright tanks. Anyone have questions about fermentation? No? Okay, we're going to go back down this hallway to that window and talk a little bit about wood aging. Room. The first thing you're going to see are 3 American white oak tanks. They are all 10,000 gallon tanks, the largest wood aging vessels of their kind in the United States. They are hand constructed on site by a father-son cooperage team, and they are held together strictly by the outer metal rings and moisture. So there are no nails, no glue, no tongue and groove holding those together. When they're first constructed, they're filled with water, which is going to leak out through the gaps in the wood staves. We're going to continue filling them with water, and after about 3.5 months, the wood's going to swell enough to create a seal. So we have to keep those full of either water or beer at all times. We have 4 beers that we age in these tanks: Immort Ale, Red and White, Old School Barley Wine, and Burton Baton. These tend to be higher alcohol beers, and the vanilla, woodsy flavors of the wood are going to smooth out some of the booziness of that high alcohol content. Over here in the corner, we have a Palo Santo tank, also 10,000 gallons. Kind of an interesting story how we came to acquire that tank. We had a Dogfish fan named John Gasparini. He was a wood distributor, and he was on business in Paraguay when he wandered into a local wine shop and tasted some of the local wines. He found them to be interesting and unusual, so he asked about it, found that they had been aged in a barrel made of Palo Santo wood. So he had an idea. He smuggled some of those chips back to the United States, called up Sam and said, "Hey man, I bet you hear this all the time, but I have got a great idea for a beer." Sam was intrigued, so he invited him down to that small batch brewery at the Rehoboth Brew Pub that I talked about, and they made the very first batch of Palo Santo Marone. Palo Santo, sainted wood, Marone brown. It is an imperial brown ale at 12% alcohol. So it went over great at the brew pub. Sam wanted to start making it full time, so he sent John back to Paraguay to get enough wood. Little did John know that this is the second most dense wood in the world. It does not float. It's also a little skinny, spindly, crooked tree, so it takes a lot of them to come up with that much wood. In the end, it took them 17 diamond-tipped saw blades to harvest the wood for this tank. By the time they got the wood, got it through customs because it had never been imported to the United States before, and then had it hand constructed on site. The cost of that tank is upwards of $140,000. Palo Santo Marone is the only beer that we age in that tank, so you can see why we think that it's a very special beer. We do clean these tanks occasionally with a light citrus cleaner. We don't want to use a heavy detergent that might seep into the wood and then leach into the beer. About once a year, we have a team come in and do a dry icing process, which is going to shave a very small layer of wood off the inside of the tanks, exposing some fresh wood so that each batch of beer gets a fresh wood-aged flavor. We know that these tanks won't last forever. We're really not sure what the lifespan on them is because they're the only ones of their kind, but we do have plans to build one oak tank and one Palo Santo tank in the future. Does anyone have questions about wood aging? Okay. The original site of the canning factory, Draper King Cold Vegetable Canning Factory, was what was here when we moved. Prior to us moving here, it had been abandoned for quite a long time. When we got here in 2002, this is where we started out. You can see we've expanded quite a bit in the years since then. I want to point out the cage over here on this side. This is the ingredient staging area. So all the ingredients that go into your beer are going to make a stop here first, where they will be weighed and measured in the appropriate amounts before they go out to the brew house. So the brewers don't have to worry about making sure they have the correct amount of anything. Over here on this side, We have our beer library. Quality control is very important to us here. So the beer is going to be tested about 40 times throughout the production process. Basically, anytime it's transferred from one tank to another or an ingredient is added, someone from quality control is going to come down, take a sample, and test it. So if there's a problem, we catch it very early and we fix it if at all possible. In some cases it can't be fixed. It doesn't happen very often, but it does happen. And we have to make the very difficult decision to just dump it and start over again. But we don't want to wait. I know, sad face. I know.
Company party.
Yeah, for some of you who may have seen the Brewmasters series on Discovery, they did a spot on having to dump a 120-minute IPA, which is just heart-wrenching to watch, particularly because it's not that the beer was bad. It really wasn't bad, but it wasn't to standard. You know, it was a little bit too sweet. It just wasn't quite what it should be. And so when somebody goes out and pays $9 for a bottle of beer, we want them to get what they're expecting. So even though it was still, I'm sure it was still really good to drink, we decided to dump it because that's how important it is to us. So having said that, we do keep a sample of every batch of beer that is made here. So if you should ever find yourself in possession of a Dogfish Head beer that you feel is not up to standard in some way, you could contact us, give us the number off the bottle, and someone will come here and pull a bottle out of that same exact batch of beer, and then we can test it. Okay, we're going to continue on down to bottling. So just keep an eye out for forklifts running around. Activity, forklifts, so it's very important to stay on this side of the red line. Here, I'll stand here where I'm supposed to stand. So the first step in bottling is we take a pallet of bottles. They come to us from a company named Owens, Illinois. The forklift's going to deposit them onto the depalletizer, where that large metal arm's going to drop down and push off one row of bottles at a time. It's then going to travel single file, Laverne and Shirley style, around the room. When it gets to the back of that line, it's going to get flipped over, and it's going to get a shot of ionized air, which will sanitize the bottle. At this point, it's going to be all the way in the back of the room. That large stainless box with a red stripe on the top of it is the filler. It's going to get filled with carbon dioxide to remove the oxygen, and then it's going to get filled with beer. Finally, right before it's capped, a small stream of water is going to come down, hit the surface of that beer, agitating it, causing it to foam up, pushing any oxygen left in the neck of the bottle out right before it's capped. We do not pasteurize our beer or use any preservatives. We feel that that diminishes the quality, so we do everything we can to protect it from oxygen so you get a fresher product. It's going to be checked to make sure that it has the right amount of beer inside, and then it's going to be rinsed off and dried ever so slightly so that the label will affix to it. At this point, it's over here in the center of the room. You can see some of those Raison Detros 6-pack carriers traveling on a conveyor belt. They start out over here where there's a machine that pops them open. At the same time, it is also constructing the case cartons underneath. They're going to travel together around the room, where they're going to meet up over here with the now finished bottle. 24 bottles will collect, drop down into the finished case carton. They'll then go through this plexiglass enclosure where the cartons are sealed up. They arrive right here, where each one of your Dogfish head cases of beer is hand-packed onto a pallet. The forklift will then pick up the pallet, take it over where it's going to be wrapped in plastic before it's taken out to the warehouse before it's shipped out. So we're going to step back out onto that platform where it's a little bit quieter and talk a little bit more about bottling and then kegging. Parking lot, you may have noticed a new building out behind this one. If you didn't, if you go to the back of the parking lot, you'll be able to see a beautiful wood panel building with big round windows, and that's our off-centered center. It's the site of our brand new bottling line and warehouse facility, and we expect to be using that bottling line by the end of the month. This current one will do about 240 bottles per minute, and our new one's going to do about 650 bottles per minute. However, because it's much more automated, we'll still have the same number of employees running it. We will ultimately run both bottling lines at the same time. That one will be devoted to 12-ounce bottles, and this one will be kept strictly for the 750 milliliter bottles. Right now we do both on this line, and it takes about 3 hours to break down and change formats. So that's going to be much more efficient. Does anyone have questions about bottling?
Percentage of the 750 versus
I don't know the answer to that, but we can find out.
only certain beers kind of.
Yes, it's either one or the other. We never do both. And
Sorry, where do you get the bottles from?
it's a company called Owens, Illinois, and they're out of Virginia. That cool? Yeah, so it tends to be the more seasonal, smaller batch beers that will go into a 750. So as far as, volume, it's going to be less on the 750 side. Yeah.
Like the Noble Rock.
Right, exactly. Sati, Namaste, My Antonio. Those, the ones that come out once a year are going to tend to be in the 750s, except for the seasonals, like the Festina Pesh, Pumpkin Ale, things like that. So we do, as I said, keg about 25 to 30% of what we produce, and here is the kegging line. We will eventually have a kegging line out in the new facility, but for now we're going to continue running this one. So we do regular half-barrel kegs and then sixtels, which is a sixth of a barrel. You may see on those kegs coming through a label that says MicroStar, because we rent all of our kegs. We don't want to be responsible for having to go back out into the world and get those back from restaurants or bars. But when we get them from MicroStar, they may have come from anywhere. Sometimes they still have beer in them, so the first thing we're going to do is empty that beer out. Then the keg's going to get an external cleaning. It's going through the tunnel of love back there, so named because it gets all hot and steamy in there. And then it's going to come out, go into this enclosure where it will get several internal cleanings. Hot water, caustic, acid, hot water again. Then it's going to be filled with CO2 to remove the oxygen, and then filled with beer. It will be weighed to make sure that it has the correct amount of beer inside. And if it's good, then it's going to be sealed up. And it's going to end up over at that blue vacuum hose hanging down from the ceiling, which the guys will use to pick up and move it over to the pallet. Then it's going to be packaged up and sent to the warehouse. Anyone have questions about kegging? Okay, that's going to conclude the formal part of our tour. As I said earlier, if you have questions about anything I didn't cover or an answer to a question I didn't know, we can take care of that when we get back to the tasting room. In the meantime, you can do some more of your free samples or purchase some beers if you like, because I think that's what we came here to do. I appreciate all of you spending your holiday weekend here with us, and I hope you'll come back and see some of the new changes we have coming up very, very soon. It's very exciting, and it's been my pleasure and privilege to do the tour with you today. Thank you.